So this is not great. I wanted to respond to an article published on Sportsnet.ca, and part of the reason I wanted to do that is because this article presents a very particular narrative in a way that I found a little more blunt than I was expecting from Sportsnet.ca. But let's dive into it either way, shall we? So, today we are talking about the Detroit Red Wings and reading this piece published by Josh Benito from 2 days ago. Have the rebuilding Red Wings already hit their peak? And I know the immediate instinctual reaction for many of y'all Red Wings fans who are watching this video. When you read the title, I think many of y'all's instinctual reaction would be, no, they haven't already peaked. What are you talking about? Michael Brandsegg Newgard, Axel Sandin Pellikka, Sebastian Cossa, Trey Augustine, Anton Johannesson. A lot of these younger guys have not made significant impacts on the team just yet, and are projected to doing so later. So what are you talking about hitting their peak? Which is why I wanted to dive into this article and take a look at what Benito writes about. He starts things off by talking about Detroit sports teams, and the Tigers, Lions are in there too. But the Wings remain in the wilderness, having now missed the playoffs for a franchise record 9 consecutive seasons. Much like last season when the Wings missed the playoffs by the tiebreaker, they showed flashes of promise in 24-25, but a dreadful collapse in March was too much to overcome. They'll finish with fewer points than they did a season ago, taking a measurable step backward in the rebuild. As players, coaches, and GM Steve Yzerman reflect on this disappointing season, doom is settling in with a fan base that is grappling with the reality that these Red Wings, as constructed, may have already peaked as a group. And it hasn't been good enough to even make the playoffs, let alone challenge for the Stanley Cup. Now, again, I think there are enough guys in the organization's prospect pool that you could go out there and reasonably say, yeah, they're going to help the team later. Therefore, the team hasn't necessarily peaked yet, but addressing the idea of those prospects, this is what Benito says afterwards. At the root of Detroit's issues is the team has struggled to develop prospects, which is a key factor in any rebuild that's committed to the draft. Detroit has made 50 draft picks in the past 6 years, and only one of those picked outside of the first round played a role on this year's team. They've only picked inside the top 5 once through this time, decreasing the chances they would end up with a franchise-changing superstar. Well, sorry, the Red Wings weren't bad enough to consistently get top 5 draft picks. Although I will say, there is something to note about how the Wings have not necessarily developed anybody outside the first round to be a main contributor, aside from, I'd just say, Jonathan Berggren and Anton Johannesson. But then again, Johannesson, is he really a mainstay guy at this point? You could even debate whether or not Berggren is, which I guess speaks to what the article is talking about, how the Wings have not had any of these extra draft picks make immediate impact so far. While fans may disagree to the extent as to how far this article is saying that Detroit can't draft, the argument they're presenting makes sense if you choose to look at it that way. The article then talks about how the worst season the Red Wings had in the past 6 years was 2019-20, but it also goes out there and says that, hey, they have Lucas Raymond, and Raymond is really good. Although I will say, he probably is better than Lafreniere and Byfield right now. It's only really Timmy Stu that's challenging for that number 1 overall spot in a redraft. Nevertheless, the article does go out there and say this: the Red Wings, even though they were able to get Lucas Raymond, they just haven't had a player in the same class as McDavid, McKinnon, or Kucherov since their playoff drought began. Again, true, but not necessarily something that I think is 100% the fault of the Wings. It's kind of luck-based after all, to find those superstar talented players in the draft and, firstly, be in a position to draft them, secondly, develop them properly and use them on your team. Not to mention the fact that some playoff teams this year, like, I'm thinking about the LA Kings, for example, how many Connor McDavid, Nikita Kucherov-like superstars do they have? 0? Quentin Byfield, he probably should be able to find himself in that tier one day, but that one day is not right now. Adrian Kempe is really good, but is he McDavid or Kucherov? Probably not. Structure, discipline, and team style play into how the LA Kings have their success, not to mention the boring defensive hockey that they play. Andrei Kuzmenko has been really good, though. This article says that Detroit lacks true elite superstar power, which often is only something you can address at a draft, and is a payoff from sinking into a rebuild. But the Wings didn't have such luck. To be sure, there is a core group of players in Detroit who have had good seasons and should be a part of the leadership for years to come. However, the production that the Red Wings got from Larkin to Brinkett and Raymond paled in comparison to other core groups from contending teams. Raymond leads the Wings with 75 points this season, which ranks 28th league-wide. DeBrinkett's 67 points are 48th, meanwhile Larkin's is 54th overall. Other rebuilding teams such as Ottawa and Montreal passed Detroit to get into the playoffs this year with young, budding rosters of their own. As a result, the Red Wings' construction of the roster is coming into question, and the missteps made along the way are catching up to them. Now, this is where we start to dive into some of the things that I think you legitimately can criticize Steve Yzerman for. The drafting and not being able to find a Connor McDavid in the draft, that's not really that big of a deal. I mean, of course, it's a big deal if you get those guys, but if you don't, it's like, okay, you're like every other team, essentially, just with a little less draft lottery luck. In recent seasons, though, Yzerman has tried to be aggressive in free agency as a way to seek productive veterans, especially forwards, and provide depth around his younger players. But more often than not, those acquisitions have failed to deliver even secondary scoring and have been a major reason for why the team is stuck in neutral. Compher with 31 points in 73 games, Kopp with 23 points in 56 games, and Tarasenko with 31 points in 77 games have all disappointed this season. Each of these players are over 30 years old, they have contracts for next season, and hold some form of no-trade clause. If Yzerman did want to move on from any of them, it won't be such an easy thing to accomplish. The article then talks about the defense, and how Jeff Petrie, Justin Hall, Ben Sherratt, this group isn't necessarily a great group of guys considering the advanced analytics and how many goals they allow at 5v5, not to mention the penalty kill. The Wings are stuck in a cycle, trying to compete by rounding out a young group with a number of veteran pickups, but finding themselves locked into a position tough to wriggle out of when it's not working. This is where the article concludes. What's the way forward now? That's a difficult to answer question, and it's why frustration is growing in the fanbase. The team isn't bad enough to pick at the top of the draft, but also lacks the roster space or trade assets to make significant upgrades. The Red Wings project to have $22 million in cap space to work with this offseason, but 16 of the 23 players on the roster are already signed. One pending free agent is Patrick Kane, who at age 36 finished 4th on the team in scoring and may be one of the veterans worth considering keeping around. The fact is, the Wings are now securely caught in the middle, the worst place any team wants to be. There's no clear path forward, optimism is waning, the management's options are slimmer than you'd like, and other teams in the rebuild phase are passing them by. But hey, at least the Lions, Tigers, and Pistons are competitive again. And that is a lot to take in. I don't necessarily agree with everything in here, but I will say some of the sentiments about middle-aged forward depth and all these extra contracts being handed out, extra years and trade protection, it doesn't look all too great. It's not a good look for the Detroit Red Wings, and I think what this article does is it kind of presents all this information in one easy-to-digest package for the average fan that doesn't really follow much Detroit stuff, because this is on Sportsnet.ca. It's kind of why I was so taken aback by how blunt the article is. Sportsnet.ca beat writers rarely dive into teams like the Red Wings in such a critical way like this article does. So I do at least applaud the piece for diving into uncharted territory for Canadian website programming, but at the same time, I do think some of these points are a little bit unfair, mostly the draft stuff, but there are some very legitimate criticisms you can make as well about Steve Yzerman and the players he has acquired. So with that in mind, I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. This article will be linked in the description too if you want to read more about it. There are some extra things in there that we didn't include in this video, but do you think this is a good look for Stevie Y? The way the season went, and the way some people are talking about it? Let me know in the comment section all your opinions. I hope you enjoyed this video. and bye.